Hello and welcome to Vivaldi's live stream today. This is part of the Interaction Field series of events. They're a special series of streams that we've got all to celebrate the fact that this week, in fact tomorrow, the book The Interaction Field is launched. It's been written by Erich Joachimsthaler, who is the founder of Vivaldi. So all of us in Vivaldi are excited about this, and we want to celebrate it with a full week of these live streams, and we have got incredible guests every single day. And today we are especially excited because we have got Rita McGrath, and I will introduce her shortly. But first of all, I want to say hello to Erich Joachimsthaler, who I am hoping, Erich, that you are excited like a 5-year-old that's been given a second slice of birthday cake, because tomorrow the book comes out. This is exciting stuff. Do you get excited when that happens?
I don't know whether little kids have to work that hard for this moment. So I'm not sure. I'm sort of like relieved rather than excited.
Yeah, I totally get that. It is a heck of a lot of work. So well done for getting to this stage. And in many ways, this is just the beginning. All this stuff was just the preparation, and now it's the beginning of we're trying to get these books into people's hands and get the knowledge into people's heads as well.
Thank you.
So we have got an incredible guest today. We've got Rita McGrath. Now, Rita is amazing. She is a professor at Columbia. She is a best-selling author. She has got numerous books. Her last 2 books, The End of Competitive Advantage is one of them. And then this one, Seeing Around Corners, being held up there. Available in all good Amazons, or if you're brave enough to go into a bookshop wearing a mask. And Rita is incredibly respected. She is consistently ranked as one of the top 10 management thinkers. And in fact, Thinkers 50 ranks her as the #1 strategic thinker. So she's right up there, which means that we are over the moon to have her on the show. So let's say hello. Hello, Rita. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Dave, and hi, Erich.
Hi, Rita.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, as we've got 3 authors here talking and sort of knowing what it's like to get a book to this stage. Your book, Rita, your last book, came out about a year ago. So here it is up on either side of Erich's head now.
I raise myself with wisdom.
I'm completely with you that I like yellow books as well. So, so how do you find it when you launch a book? Do you get all excited? Do you end up having like weeks of podcasts booked in after the launch?
Oh yes, it's podcasts. Well, when this book launched, I was on the road for probably 6 months, and
wow.
It just it takes over your life.
Yeah. So with your the book.
Now. It's a different world now, it's traveling along the internet, I guess, is a better description.
I was joking this there was a day last week where I was in Norway in the morning and then went off to Africa, and then I was one day.
Yeah,
goodness.
Jet lag. This is really... Actually, there's a good thing about the pandemic. Let's talk about it. That no jet lag, We only have screen lags or something like that.
Zoom
I don't
lag.
know what the disease is going to be.
Zoom lag.
Zoom lag.
So I guess on that note, Rita, I mean, you're not one for necessarily conventional thinking. I mean, the end of competitive advantage is as provocative as you can get when it comes to business strategy. What's your take on business strategy and where it is just now? I mean, even before the pandemic, are companies working with good business strategy, or are they working with old business strategy that's kind of out of date?
Well, it's all over the map, right? Depending on where you are. A friend of mine likes to quote that When times are good, who bothers with strategy? And when times are bad, who's got time for it? So I think the better companies have done a couple of things differently. And I talk about a new playbook for strategy. So they've certainly accelerated their pace of decision making. And I think what we're seeing the better companies doing is incorporating storytelling and qualitative metrics as much as they're looking at the traditional tools of analytics and older style reasoning.
So, Erich, I mean, some of the stuff that you're looking at here, when we're talking about creating this sort of interaction field landscape, this idea of platform businesses, again, there's a lot of emotion that comes into that because you're looking at communities. Is that something that businesses are any good at?
Well, if you look at what Rita just said, when you build advantage in the traditional way, the supply chain business, or sometimes called pipeline, it is a much more let's call it a analytical exercise. You can optimize, you have metrics, you have hard numbers that help you maximize and optimize and digitize, if you will, the supply chain of your products and services. When the value is created through communities on the demand side, then I think, and that's where we are today, and this is where the interaction field book is about. I think as Rita said, the metrics become a lot more soft, if you will. They become a lot more. They're much more difficult to develop, if you will, and to achieve than they are when you build advantage on the traditional ways. And I think Rita talked about how that shift is taking place. I think, Rita, that's what you were referring to in some ways.
Absolutely. Well, if you think about platform businesses, right, so much of it has to do with trust. I have to trust that you're not going to betray me in some way. I have to trust that you're going to be an honest broker. And so a lot of it really is about human connection.
That's right. And I think this is what Dave referred to as the community. In some ways, I come from a brand and marketing angle, and I find that it doesn't matter how successful you build a platform, you still have to solve for the chicken and egg problem. You still have to engage, create the participation, create the interactions, if you will. And to do that, it is reputation, it is brand, it is trust that is basically manifested, that sort of becomes a source of competitive advantage in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So we've ended up in a situation at the moment where things changed in this sort of seismic jolt. And when you talk about inflection points, were we already in an inflection point when it came to the people working remotely and meetings happening over a distance and all of the things that the pandemic has brought up around? Were we already in that inflection point and it was just accelerated, or is this the inflection point itself?
Well, I think we were already in it, and this has been an accelerant. I mean, what you'll see with inflection points, and that was actually one of the motivations for me to write the book, is it's like the old Hemingway phrase, how did you go bankrupt? Well, gradually, and then suddenly. What you see with inflection points is there's quite a long period of sort of bubbling up and simmering, and then there's some sort of tipping point, and it goes into a much more accelerated mode. And I think that's what we've seen with COVID. For a lot of companies, they would have said, if you'd said, equip all your employees to go remote and as many people who can work from home as possible, they would have said, yeah, we'll get to that. And then within a matter of a couple of weeks, they were basically forced to make those investments and forced to teach people to operate this way. And now, having done that, I think there's going to be a lot of difficulty going directly back to the way things were before. We've learned a lot of new tricks.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I find interesting is that there is this inflection point, and the way to go back seems to be so distant because when you think of what happened in the year, in just 2 years, I just read that Apple actually became a $2 trillion company worth, and 2 years ago, almost by the month, 2 years ago there were 1 trillion. I thought 1 trillion was like an achievement over 30 or 50 years, and most companies never would get there. And Apple does in another 2 years, adds another trillion, and a $1 trillion big company that is so omni-powerful in some ways. And the same thing you see in the car industry. There is this exponential curve of Tesla that now makes Tesla in 1 year 4 times more valuable more valuable than any other car company on this planet. So it just and I think that's why I think about that, because at least for Tesla, it's been a long time coming, very gradually, and then suddenly. So the pandemic has this inflection point we live in has changed so much that it seems to be irreversible of how the value creation has changed and the dominance of companies. It seems to be a real turnover, if you will, in terms of wealth creation or value creation.
Yeah. So can I just say to everyone that's watching just now that if you've got any questions, please put them in the comments. We want your questions. We want you to be part of this. And this week, as a special, if you have your question chosen, we will send you a copy of Erich's new book. How about that? There we go. There's a little there's a little bribe for you.
The price of the book is now going down already because it's available. Scarcity. Rita, I have this question, and if we see, there's a lot of discussion these days about the Teslas of the world, the Facebook, Apples, the GAFA or FANGAs, including Netflix, sometimes also Microsoft. But I'm curious about your perspective on how does a company that is a traditional company, not a technology company, companies that you probably know very well, the typical incumbent, so to speak, that have been successful. Let's see, in the car industry, the BMWs of the world, or Volkswagen, or some of in every other industry. And how do they manage this inflection point? And I'm thinking of your article in HBR where you talk about a discovery-driven transformation, and I thought that's quite an interesting perspective. But how do you see this? Is that a good model for how to deal with the change or this inflection point in this world today?
Well, I think the whole notion of digital transformation is quite key. But what a lot of people do is they see it coming, right? And you see these things coming often years before they actually require a response. You see it coming and they freak out, right? And it's like, okay, you've got to mount a huge response. And instead, what I think makes a lot more sense is to say, okay, if our vision is clear, what we want to get to, what's the first step? What is a beginning point? And then master that, and then learn from that and master the next one, rather than trying to take a giant leap into the unknown. So for years, I've studied innovation flops, corporate failures, the big ones, Medium, for example. And what you find is a common pattern: untested assumptions taken as facts, no opportunity for low commitment testing, no learning along the way, no pivoting, leaders who are absolutely, damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead kind of people. And it very often leads you wrong, because with high levels of uncertainty, and we're all dealing with that now, the only solution is learning your way in.
Yeah, and that's interesting in itself, because what I think has been sort of the vogue or the fashion, if you will, in lately has been the first step is to declare a major purpose, what we really want to achieve, what we really stand for, and why we do things, and that appears to be oftentimes a very grandiose expression of how you solve world hunger or something. And if you suggest the step-by-step approach, if you will, leaning into it, if you will, in another way, that sort of almost is in conflict with the pronunciation of purpose. And is that fair?
Well, I don't actually think they're in conflict. I think you can have a really grand vision and a path that says this is how we're going to learn our way there. A great example would be something like Amazon's Alexa, where they started out as mediocre speakers, right? I mean, that was where Alexa began. But now the thinking behind Alexa is now being actually incorporated into other people's products. So it's a very interesting ecosystem play if you think about it.
Yeah.
And yet I think their purpose was very grand from the beginning, but where they started was step by step.
That's true. I think it's really interesting. It is a step-by-step process because it is as you say, it is almost it's almost like to your point. It's gradually then suddenly, and I think that's the point of view. What I really like is your example. I have it in my book as well. The Klöckner example. The reason why I like Klöckner is because to me Amazon is so far out of reach. I mean, they are like off the charts. They have done so much. It's not so normal of a company. Can you talk about I think you talk about Klöckner and how did Klöckner evolve from a traditional metal supplier, I believe it was, toward a what I call an interaction field company that also includes a marketplace and things like that. So, what was your biggest sort of insight there?
Well, the thing I thought was super interesting was Discoverydriven, who's their CEO, looked around and he said, there are all these platforms springing up all around us. And he looked at his own value chain and he said, my God, we're still sending faxes to each other to place orders. I mean, how archaic is this? And if we don't digitize, someone will do it to us, is basically where I think he started. So he started off trying to have folks in Duisburg, in their headquarters, kind of huddle together and come up with new ideas, and that really didn't work. So then what he did was he took 2 engineers, sent them off to Berlin, in the tech hub there, and he said, look, just do something. I don't care what it is, something that's digital that makes this easier for our customers to do business with. And so one of the first things they tackled was the fax problem. They said, okay, what if we made an electronic version of the fax? And it's all the same data, it's all the same information. And what's fascinating to me about it is it made life easier for the customers because they could do it electronically. But when that information hit the sort of boundary of the firm, it didn't perturb anything behind that boundary. So as far as the parent company was concerned, it was just a different way of getting the exact same information, and they followed through with the exact same processes. So he didn't start off with something that was going to put the mothership, into a frenzy. It started off with something that, that's easier. Okay, we can all get on board with that. And then the next thing they did was they automated the inventory system. So let's have barcodes on things. And now it's even easier because now we know where everything is. And so it wasn't one giant leap. It was a series of gradual improvements that both sides could see. Now, one of the things I'm particularly taken with Klöckner is that they were very respectful of the expertise and the deep skill of the parent company people. So some companies go overboard with digital. They're like, everything's got to be digital. We're all going to come in at midnight in T-shirts and pizza and whatever it is. And instead, what they said was the digital has its place, and we've got a lot to learn from them. But our long-lasting competitive advantage is the fact that we have these incredibly skilled and talented people, deep experts, in our field, and that's what's going to give us longer-term advantage on top of the digital.
That's almost the art form here. The art form here is working with, I think it was the frontline salespeople, and the people, let's say, call it in Berlin, that are more sort of into the let's say the digital world, and bringing that together. It's almost a leadership principle rather than sort of like the traditional form is to bake it off in some venture group that sort of like comes up with amazing ideas in some ways and let the mothership sort of. So it's like a fine art of leading that change and integrating. And I really like this again. This is that to your digital transformation sort of process. It starts with the operating experience. You mentioned the facts. It's like that simple. Now, wait a moment. Is that even possible? This was a few years ago. They started with, they still use the fax in order to run their business. That's just 3-4 years ago.
It's astonishing, isn't it? Now, here's another astonishing thing. If you look at healthcare, certainly in the United States, they still use faxes because that's regarded as one of the few secure. We have a health law called HIPAA, secure way of transmitting information. So I literally still own a fax machine whose only purpose is to send information backwards and forwards to doctors' offices.
It is, yeah. So, but
nobody else ever uses a fax.
Yeah, and the most important point is you don't have to be a digital leader in order to in this kind of inflection to actually leapfrog, if you will, or do business in the post-pandemic world. You can be as, if let's say, backward as the fax machine, and you can, in this day and age, because technology is really available to make the leap. So it's a question of leadership. It's a question, but that's sort of interesting. It's not for the leading companies only to make that shift, the digital transformation shift, to become what I call an interaction field business. It is also, it is for everyone, literally, regardless in what level of quote digital maturity you would be.
Mm-hmm. So one other thing I think it's really valuable to reflect on in Faulkner is, it was as much a cultural change as anything else. And one of the things Rula did was he implemented what he calls non-hierarchical communication. So it happened to be Yammer. And literally anybody in the company could send a message and he would read it. Not everybody every day, but people, this was shocking, right? Because a traditional German company is quite bureaucratic and very hierarchical. And you respect the boundaries.
I know them.
And so the fact that he would be expressing a willingness to hear what was really going on the front lines is remarkable. It's remarkable. And I think one of the things that I write about in the book is how hard it is for people in decision-making roles to actually get unfiltered information about what's really going on. So that was one technique that they used very successfully.
Mm-hmm. So we've got some questions here. So let's see. We've got Karen here is saying, building on a mention of Tesla and a further comment we had. What's your point of view of Carvana? Are you guys familiar with Carvana?
Yes.
So it's a very new way to buy and sell a car. What's your opinion on that and how well timed it is? So I guess, Erich, if you understand this one, I'll pass this one over to you if you understand Carvana.
How do I understand? We just talked about Klöckner. Klöckner is in a almost from Duisburg. Duisburg is a very rural, very beautiful part of Germany, not where the major cities are that you probably popularly know here in the US. And it's a very traditional business. And Klöckner Metals was into metal trading and was able to evolve as Rita describes in her latest Harvard Business Review article. And what we see with Carvana is a bit different, because Carvana is in the automotive, in the trading business, and there has been evolutions to that industry, from traditional dealers, marketing and sales, if you will, to Auto Trader, to Circuit City has launched a car trading services, and there is now a new evolution, Carvana, and so it's a marketplace, a digital marketplace that I think defines and it pushes the boundaries of how retailing takes place and trading takes place with cars. So I think that Carvana and other similar concepts are models that I don't know whether they should be standalone models and standalone companies, but they ought to be part of what Rita McGrath called the operating experience that you need to define for in the mobility area.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I would just add that this is not a new thing. Like any of these industries, and taxis is another example. We had a thing called CarMax in the U.S. We had a whole bunch of there's been many attempts to get into the automotive business, because what a lot of people don't realize is that for the dealers, at least in the U.S., I'm not sure what it's like in the rest of the world, they make all their money on the used cars, because the new cars are essentially commodities in the sense of the prices are transparent. you can call around and pretty much get a range on a new car. It's much more specific what there is. Whereas with a used car, there's a lot more negotiation historically involved. And that, of course, led to a whole blossoming of rather shady practices, which meant that the experience was not very pleasant for many buyers. And you always sort of left feeling that you'd gotten taken advantage of somehow. So what a lot of these trading companies have tried to do is kind of take out that ick factor in the marketing of used cars.
What's sort of interesting is that, Rita, is that a lot of innovation takes place then in companies like Carvana. Mm-hmm. They are trying a new angle. They look at the different jobs to be done using Clayton Christensen's word and also your words in your book. They rapidly innovate, and they are almost not innovating based on their own assets and capabilities. They're innovating through understanding all the opportunities outside so it's this open innovation that allows them to change the user experience, if you will, much more rapidly and in an agile way than maybe a traditional car dealership can.
Well, and I think the kind of innovation you're seeing is this rebellion almost against business practices and regulations that keep the existing system as it is. And there are a lot of reasons why those sprang up, right? I mean, if you take a typical American small town, the guy that owned the local car dealerships are among the most influential of their local citizens. You know, they're pillars of the community and so forth. And so I think it's very interesting that's where a lot of these disruptors tried to take a foothold, which is, you know, clearing out some of that regulatory burden.
Yep.
Okay, we've got another question here. We've got loads of questions coming in. It's lovely. It's great to see them coming in. So this one, Rita, what's the most unusual or unexpected response to an inflection point that you've observed during the pandemic? And did you agree with it? This is really putting you on the spot here.
Impossible to do, really.
I think among the more interesting things is how quickly so many companies really pivoted their business models. So there, just as an example, there's a company called, I think they're called Timberlane in Pennsylvania that makes beautiful shutters for homes. And of course, from the pandemic, nobody's really got that as number one priority. But their CEO said, you know, my choices are I can shut down and lay people off, or I could figure out where else I might be able to use the capabilities of my company in a fruitful way. And they went into the making of personal protective equipment. And that's now a whole line of offers for themselves. So you've seen a lot of companies really pivoting their business models. One of the most interesting, I think, realities that the pandemic has laid bare is that in so many parts of our economy, we actually have two supply chains that run in parallel with each other, but most people don't understand that they're radically different. So just as an example, in food, you know, you've got one supply chain that deals with groceries, let's say, so that's food you and I would buy, and a completely different supply chain that deals with restaurants. And of course, the restaurant demand has disappeared or been drastically reduced. And so what you had was on that side of the house, people were literally throwing away milk and potatoes and eggs and, you know, things just because they couldn't get them to their customers. Whereas you had incredible shortages on the other side and, you know, long lines of food banks and so forth. So one of the most, I think, dysfunctional things the pandemic has revealed is how brittle and how non-resilient so many parts of our very financialized, very efficiency-driven economy have become.
Yeah. So from that point there, Erich, what's your take on that for what companies and even industries? And I know that the idea of an industry is something, Rita, that you kind of don't like the idea of confining something to an industry. But for this, Erich, these are very much these are very much pipeline businesses. When we've got these pipeline supplies. Is there ways that companies like that are so brittle, as Rita says, that they can embrace more of a sort of platform approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there is a similarity of the way we think about it. I call it you need to frame your business, and you're in the action field. And if you begin thinking yourself as a grocery business, or you think yourself as a restaurant business, to use the example from Rita, you're already doomed to fail, because you look, as Rita says, you look at it as two separate supply chains. If you start looking this from a consumer perspective, from a demand perspective, you ask yourself, what are consumers really looking for? They want to eat healthy food. That's really or they want to have food, quality food. And then the question becomes, and you start at that point, what I think Rita calls this arenas, or at least it's an element of arenas. So there's a more elaborate discussion Rita has carried. But I think this is what we need to think about. You're not in the car business. You're in the mobility business. We don't solve for anymore the numbers of cars sold, or growth is not number of cars sold. It's how we solve for the mobility. And I think that taking that perspective is the starting point of what Rita calls the discovery-driven digital transformation process, which is also what I consider a very meaningful starting point to build the interaction field company.
Yeah, Rita, could you expand on that, this discovery-driven approach?
Sure. So discovery-driven planning is a tool that really started in the world of innovation, but I think has broad applicability to any high uncertainty situation. And what got my colleague and I, who developed this is back in the 90s, what got us fascinated by this was companies would launch these big, important new ventures in areas where you would think they would know what they were doing. So Euro Disney would be an example from back then. And what we saw was they would fail. They would fail miserably and utterly. And we were puzzled by this. And what we realized was that all of these new things were being planned as though there was a platform of predictable information to draw upon. And so you could make your plans and hire your 20 people and get your teams out and going. When instead, if you're in a high uncertainty situation, the range of possible uncertainties that you need to tend to could be very, very wide. And so what we said was, well, rather than have these grandiose plans that assume you know what you're doing, what you're going to do instead is have a clear goal. And so you may want a big ambitious goal, but before you take a big giant leap there, plan to the next checkpoint, and then stop and do what I call race, which is, do you want to redirect? Do you want to accelerate? Should we just continue? Or maybe we should exit. Maybe we've learned that this isn't such a good idea. And what I find is in most organizations, the traditional processes encourage people to continue with anything that they've started all the way through some natural conclusion. And it leads to a lot of chaos and confusion, because in the beginning, you really don't know what you're doing. You have to discover it. Hence discovery-driven planning.
Yeah, I mean, are we finding that in the Rumsfeld matrix that there's most companies are still focusing on the known knowns, and it's the others. When it comes to the unknown unknowns, particularly, they're pretty dreadful at being open to that kind of information and knowing how to get to it. Yeah.
Well, and I think the pandemic has really laid bare that so few people, and I don't blame people, but it is entirely possible to be a very senior leader in a very large organization and to never have touched innovation, never have touched a high uncertainty situation. You're getting paid and you're being rewarded for optimizing, for keeping the wheels turning, for copying exactly, for doing what you're doing. You're not being paid to sort of sit at your desk and gaze out the window and think at what possibilities there are, right? I mean, people walk by and say, what are you doing? I'm thinking deeply about potential future post-pandemic. I mean, no, you don't get rewarded for that. You get rewarded for doing stuff. And so I think a lot of what we train leaders, managers to do is ineffectual in a high uncertainty situation.
Yeah, I like to sort of separate these things into doing and thinking. I think that these are two separate tasks. And when a lot of businesses are very much, they focus on the doing and on presenteeism and on all of these things with their staff, is it leaves no room for the thinking, which is the valuable bit that can, I don't want to say give you competitive advantage, but can differentiate you even on a short-term basis.
One of my favorite stories ever was I was teaching for Microsoft for a while in a big leadership program they had there. And they had a guy who sat in class, but he had, I guess, a bit of attention channeling challenges. And what he would do when he was in class is he would make these beautiful origami birds. And he said, look, I'm hearing you, I'm attentive. It's not that I'm ignoring you, but this is how I have to kind of keep myself busy doing something manual so that I can listen. And I was talking to one of their heads of HR about this, and she said, in our business, all it takes is one person to have one brilliant idea, and that could be $1 billion. So we're very interested in diversity of all kinds. We don't treat our people as though it's a piecework process, right? We really want to encourage that ingenuity.
Love that.
We need more of that, yeah. So I've got some more questions here. There's one I'm trying to find here about. Here we go. I think sort of based on what some of the things you were saying there is that how will leadership have to evolve for the post-pandemic world? So we're finding that obviously that. As you're saying, that a lot of these business leaders haven't had to deal with high uncertainty situations. And as we come out of this, it's still the Wild West. There's still lots of unknown unknowns. How do leaders open themselves up to possibilities and lead for innovation? I know that this is really where your heart is, Rita. Leadership for innovation.
So I think the first thing to be very humble about is that when you've got so much uncertainty, this sort of notion we have of leadership, which is some guy on a horse brandishing a sword, that's not going to give you the answers, right? The answers are going to come from the edges of the organization. They're going to come from perhaps not even the most senior people. They're going to come from where something is surprising or different or whatever. And I think in many ways, you're seeing it play out in the pandemic. If you look at countries that are led by women, many of them are doing much better than countries that are led by men. And I think when you think about the sort of classic ways women lead, right, it's inducing a sense of calm. It's, look, here's what I know, here's what I don't know. That's the vulnerable part, right? When I learn more, I'll let you know. But for today, this is what I think the best course of action is. And I think getting people to see beyond themselves and see much more for the collective, specifically with respect to the pandemic, I think that's super important. More broadly, I think we need leaders that are prepared to be discovery driven, right? So when new information comes in, you update your assumptions. When you're open to hearing disconfirming information, you create psychologically safe workspaces, as Amy Edmondson very famously talks about. And so I think we're going to have a premium on that sort of leadership. But the risk is, and here's the big if, and this is work that's been done by Tomas Chimuro for music in a wonderfully provocatively titled book called Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders? What we do, as human beings is we confuse confidence with competence. And that a lot of very competent leaders do not go out there beating their breasts and saying how great they are, And so we have to get beyond that. And one of the things I've been working on quite a lot is how do we, and human beings are very biased, we are very emotional in our responses. Somebody says, I know, I got this, I'm great, and them, right? We believe them. When somebody else says, well, there's a lot of uncertainty, I'm not sure, and we're like, oh, well, I don't want to go with that person because what do they know, right? And so we do exactly the wrong thing. So one of the things we need to be thinking about is how do we organize what the psychologists call our choice architecture so that our human reactions aren't allowed to dominate the ultimate outcome. And if we can do that, then we can sort of mitigate these biases that we have to some extent.
Yeah. And Erich, looking at your sort of view of the interaction field, creating a sort of interaction field company or a platform-based company, does that require different leadership skills than the traditional command and control, testosterone-driven kind of leadership? Does it require more sensitivity, more openness, putting yourself below people rather than above them? What's the approach that it takes to be able to run an interaction field company?
Dave, that was a leading question. The answer
it was
yes,
hugely leading.
It follows nicely what Rita says. The idea of confidence is often confused with competence. I think in this pandemic world, confidence, whether it's by men or women, I think is very quickly shattered. You realize that Rita talked about talking about the edge and understanding the edge of your organization. And I would think that you have to even think beyond the edge of your organization. You look at the larger interaction field. Nobody can do it alone. And that requires to be a degree of humbleness that necessarily was the success factor of the past. And so I think leadership here means engagement, participation, building the trust and reputation that we mentioned earlier, that allows participants to mutually create value. That's part of the evolution we are in, and I think the pandemic has made this I think has put this into what I would call an overdrive in some ways. So, yeah.
Yeah. Right. I think it's probably time for us to.
Yeah. Just one other thing on that, Erich, which is if you're going to be part of an ecosystem, right? Trust is so important, and if I'm the sort of person who's like, me first, my company first, I want to be in charge, you join my ecosystem, I mean, who's gonna agree to that?
Yeah, no chance of building a value creation these days. I think that what is also important for me is and as part of the interaction field book is, I said there's Blue Apron in meal kit solutions. But there are 150 versions out there. There is Casper in mattresses, but there are 175 mattress companies very similar to Casper. So what we are needing to solve for in this post-pandemic world isn't necessarily another mattress or another meal kit solution. What we need to solve for are very intractable, very complex problems that are not only consumer problems, larger societal problems, and industry problems. You mentioned Klöckner. Solving inventory problems for Klöckner is an industry-wide problem for metal trading. And so I think that these new business models we talk about, like the interaction field model, like ecosystems, by engagement, by participation, by creating meaningful interactions on the basis of trust, you are solving the problems that we are really facing, and I think we've been having all along, but I don't think we can afford to wait anymore. And so I think this is the beauty. I think what comes out of, I think also the pandemic is almost like a wake up call also for us to say we got to sort of evolve.
So to wrap up here, I'd like to ask you both, and starting with you, Rita. There's a lot of companies have got past that OMG part of the pandemic, and they've settled down into what they think is a new normal, but the problem is that they've settled down. When it comes to sort of looking for the opportunities and looking to make the most of an inflection point like this, or an accelerated inflection point, what's the one piece of advice, the most important thing that you think that they should be looking to do at the moment? What's the one action they can take?
Well, I would say you really want to get control of your portfolio of investments. And that sounds so boring, but most companies of any size and complexity have absolutely no idea what they're actually spending money on in terms of what are we doing that supports our core business? What are we doing that could be the next generation of growth for us? What are we doing that are these little options for the future that show us windows on what might be happening? And so I think if you haven't really gone back and said, what have we got? How much of that is still relevant? What can we stop doing so that we can have the resources to start doing new things? If you haven't done that, then you're probably behind.
Yep, fantastic. Erich, what would your tip be for companies in that position just now?
I think that the one thing I would do is I would stop being obsessed with competitors and with competition and competing alone, and I would look at the assets, the capabilities of a company I have, the trust that I have with customers, let's say, or consumers, and I ask myself, how do I evolve? How do I build a new business models? What must I do in order to to create participation, collaboration, and engagement and that goes beyond the boundaries of the firm. It includes an ecosystems. What are my partners? How am I interacting? Do I transact with my partners? Are they my suppliers or vendors? Or am I really creating an interaction, and a meaningful interaction that creates value? And sort of, what am I solving for? I think these introspective questions, I think, are absolutely essential in this day and age. I'm so pleased we have Rita here, because she wrote the book on seeing around the corner, and suggests a process of how to do that. So I can only encourage to read the book. That's the first thing I would do tomorrow or today. This is the one thing. Read the book.
Absolutely. So you can see up in the top right corner of the screen there, we've got Rita's book, available in all good Amazons. And also from tomorrow is Erich's book. You can pre-order it just now. It's the last day you can pre-order. Tomorrow it's actually out. So if you go along to bit.ly/the-IF, standing for the interaction field, then that will take you to the page where you can actually buy the book and get it delivered very soon, depending on how good deliveries are in your area right now. Now, Rita, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a huge privilege having you on. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your time with us today, and for answering some questions from the audience as well. For the audience asking questions, thank you. You are brilliant. For those who are watching right now, you are part of the live team. You're the crew. We love you. We also have very warm feelings for those who are doing a watch again on the replay. But thank you all so much, and especially Rita, thank you so much. And please come back here tomorrow, where we are going to be celebrating the actual launch of Erich's book. But that's it from us just now. I want to say thank you, I love you, goodbye everyone.